Our next speaker is Jim Skea, who I think of all of us needs no introduction at all. Jim, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. I haven't rehearsed this at all. Right, yeah, I do have my presentation here. Well, the job I was given by the editors of the book, and I'm not sure whether this was because I was the retiring UKERC director and they felt sorry for me, but my job was to write the first chapter that touched on almost everything that was in the rest of the book without duplicating or overlapping with what came in the subsequent chapters. So what I'm going to do is do an incredibly fast spin through some of the factoids, as it were, that are presented in that chapter 1. And what I would say about this is, first of all, I mean, Jean-Charles mentioned climate change as the major issue, but one of the things that comes across very clearly, even if you set aside climate change, the tectonic plates in the global energy system would be changing anyway. And it was that kind of convergence of these factors that we were trying to set the scene for in this particular piece of work. And also trying to demonstrate that we couldn't think about this in the UK or Europe alone. We needed to really, really think in a global context if we were going to understand what was going on. So very quickly through it. This is historical global energy use back over just over 40 years. Very clear picture. It's dominated by fossil fuels, the blue, the red and the green. The annual growth has been about 2% per year, but it accelerated when we got into the last decade. And in fact, you'll see that the acceleration in the growth was largely caused by the growing use of coal over the last decade. Now, what IPCC did was to try to explain what was going on with the change in greenhouse gas emissions associated with this, breaking it down into 4 factors: population growth, income growth, energy intensity of GDP, and the carbon intensity of energy. So you can see energy intensity of GDP is constantly below the line, tending to pull emissions down, as until about 10 years ago was the carbon intensity of energy. But what you see was that population and income were driving emissions up in a very obvious way. But there was a big change when we got to the last decade, because income growth accelerated, largely to do with growth in Asia, and that pushed us up. And at the same time, carbon intensity actually went backwards, largely because of that increase of coal use in China. So this was the kind of thing that we're facing when we are walking up a down escalator, rather, when we're trying to deal with climate change at the moment. But there are promising signs. This is going back about 15 years. This is the growth of output of wind and solar energy. It's still a very small part of the overall energy picture, but the growth is truly extraordinary, I think, over the last 15 years. And most of it here is dominated by wind energy in developed countries, but wind in developing countries is also becoming extremely important. And in fact, the largest installation of wind is in China now at the moment. Solar energy, right at the top, also growing, but lower load factors mean that it has made less of a difference in terms of actual energy output. Now, one of the things we looked at in there was to compare everybody's outlooks for energy, and we chose the year 2040 to compare them, because that simple pragmatic reason, that was the one year we could get everybody on the same, singing from the same hymn sheet and get a year in which we would compare. So at the left we've got the 2011 baseline, and we have a range of projections here for 2040 from public bodies like the International Energy Agency, private companies like Exxon, Shell and BP. And there are some things about this picture that are common between people. Everybody thinks that energy use is going to go up. Everybody thinks that energy efficiency is going to improve. Everybody thinks there's going to be more gas. And everybody thinks there's going to be more renewable energy. These are the common themes that you got to cut across it. Where you see big differences are the degree to which coal will continue to be used, and also importantly the use of energy for transportation. That's something that really distinguishes the different scenarios. So, and the other big differentiator, it's in the title, is the assumption about what happens to dealing with climate change. because some of these scenarios are kind of extrapolations of what is happening at the moment. Many of those to the right-hand side are of that nature, but the IEA 2 degrees scenario on the left-hand side is a normative scenario where it says what the answer is, we must get to 2 degrees, then works backwards to say what needs to happen to the energy system. And this is just to emphasize the point on renewable energy. It's 2011 is the amount of renewable energy in use globally, and everybody thinks that renewable energy is going to expand, even in a business as usual scenario. And in fact, if you look to the right-hand side, this is the Shell Ocean scenario right at the right-hand side, shows an enormous growth in solar energy, for example. Now, the other point we wanted to emphasize, it's not all about climate, you know, the energy dynamics matter as well. And we've actually done a little bit of historical work on what has happened to trade in energy. And this graph refers to oil. We've got them for gas and coal as well. And you see, back in the 1970s, when we had the oil crisis, many developed countries were very dependent on imports of oil. There was a big response to that in terms of economics and policy. That import dependency fell. But when prices fell in the 1980s, we gradually began to get addicted to oil again. And now the dependency is up to where it was before, with the one change that China is now a major importer of oil as well. So very different dynamics in the global energy system. The other point I would want to emphasize, and it's something that our US colleagues felt was perhaps missing from the last IPCC report, was the extent of the shale gas revolution in the United States and what it's actually done to global energy markets. These are the projections from the US Department of Energy, showing just what they expect to happen to the shale gas contribution to US gas demand out to 2040. And whereas shale gas was next to nothing a decade ago, they can see it meeting half of US gas demand by the time we're out sort of 2 to 3 decades from now. So a very big change in the overall picture. And the other thing that we've seen there, and Mike Bradshaw, the third editor, this is really his speciality area, global gas markets. Between about the mid-1980s and maybe about 10 years ago, prices of natural gas were really quite convergent in the Far East, in Europe, in the United States. But with the shale gas revolution and also with the Fukushima accident, we started to see these divergences in regional gas markets. So by the end of the picture, you've seen US gas prices plummeting, Europe continuing to go up, but a real development of gas prices in Japan, a very wide separation, which cannot exist forever. There have to be some changes in trading patterns to begin to equilibrate with these very different gas prices. And I've got one last diagram, which is a bit complicated, but let me just say that what it illustrates is the interconnectedness of global energy demand and says why we need to think globally. What it is looking at changes in power station fueling between 2010 and 2012 in 3 major markets. Below the line, that means you reduced that type of electricity generation. Above the line, it means you increased it. And basically, it combines 3 things: the shale gas revolution, persistent investment in new renewable energy, and the Fukushima accident. So if we take the US at the right, we had the shale gas revolution pushing more gas into US power markets. There was also continuing investment in renewable energy. It drove coal out of US power station markets, which then moved across to Europe, where it combined with renewable energy to push natural gas out of the European markets. And finally, the natural gas was then picked up again in Japan, where it helped to compensate partly for the loss of power due to the Fukushima nuclear accident. And I think this is a beautiful illustration of why you can't think about one region of the world separately. This is real interconnectedness, and that's the kind of thing that I hope this book is tried to demonstrate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. And,